I've always been fascinated with the facet of spirituality, if you like. And I probably, I grew up in a religious background, but that wasn't it. But it wasn't truly a deeper understanding of falling from head to heart and really understanding what that's all about. That came much later. I probably got introduced to it through a book that I was given in 2006 called Ask and It Shall Be Given, which still sounds quite religious, but it really is more about just understanding of that wisdom that actually continues to live within inside us, and our ability to access it and then leverage it to have peaceful and successful lives.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation. Hey everybody, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me here at Warriors at Work. So over the last few months, I've been having a lot of conversations with leaders about growth, evolution, navigating change, transition. And I was thrilled to reconnect with someone from my circle, Caroline Faulkner, who is in the middle of a significant reinvention. And she has so much insight and ideas and experiences to offer the world as she considers what happens when you think about your life and your career after a really large executive role. What is 2.0? And so we had the opportunity to carve out some time and talk about reinvention. Caroline is a distinguished global leader that has significant experience in Fortune 50 companies. She's renowned for her pioneering leadership style, her ability to guide teams through pivotal changes, and be an incredible coach, mentor, and manager through each of the peaks and valleys that occurred over those 35 years. She has this direct, approachable, authentic style. She's a great storyteller. She joined me in this conversation from her homeland, Donegal, Ireland. She talks a lot about not just her business experiences and the big ahas that she had over the course of her journey, but the rituals, the practices, the philosophies, this sense of self, and how all of those things have been key ingredients as she is considering what these gifts are going to be as she brings those forward now into the world in a new way. So this conversation will explore lots of avenues within the idea of reinvention. Whether you're in the middle of one, you're considering one, this conversation is filled with amazing insights. Enjoy. Caroline Faulkner is here with me at Warriors at Work, and we are going to have an incredible conversation about your journey, Caroline. So first of all, thank you for being here and welcome to the Warriors at Work platform. So thrilled to have you joining us from Donegal, Ireland.
Donegal, Ireland. This is where we are.
So, Caroline, what I'd love to do is start with a gigantic step back. I always like for people that I'm interviewing to give a little context around their story and their journey. And you have had an extraordinary journey to this moment. So, what can you share with us about your journey, Caroline?
It's basically, I could write a book and probably will at some point, Jeannie, because many people have asked me that question. So there's a kind of interesting combination of personal life experiences and career life experiences. But I guess if I were to give you the headlines, born and bred in this very town that I have now returned to, which is Donegal in the northwest of Ireland, a very beautiful spot. Born number 10 of 12 in a very large Irish Catholic family. So that's fun and continues to be fun. I think educationally, I was always sort of wired, I always say I was left brain, right brain, which like that could be a real asset, but when you're trying to choose the path you're going on, at the beginning, what am I going to major in? What is going to be my career? I was drawn to the sciences and the maths and all that kind of stuff. But in the background, I was always doing amateur dramatics and all that kind of stuff. So I allowed myself to sort of play with both of those things. But ultimately, we all have wise mothers, and they say, hang on a minute, you ought to pursue the thing that's going to be more, not so much fulfilling, but they look at sort of what's going to enrich your life versus where you could have fun. Because let's face it, in the acting arena, I think 1% of people make a proper living. So I was encouraged to go with the more academic side of my brain power, and I ended up in computer science. In 1985, when I was certainly in the arena where there was no computers at school, there was none at home. They certainly weren't in businesses very much then, and it was really just the start of building towards the internet and the dot-coms and all that kind of stuff. So many people were a little skeptical of my choice because it wasn't naturally on the list. I kind of deviated. I went to Northern Ireland to do this degree. Some people says, I'm not sure this computer malarkey will last, but I always had that little risk appetite. I always trusted my senses, Jeannie, even when I didn't have all the information. And off I went to pursue a career in computer science for business. And the business aspect of that was really important to me because I landed my very first job as a computer programmer inside an actual manufacturing facility in the business with all of the salespeople, the purchasing people, the manufacturing people, the warehousing people. And the beauty of that is a lot of my colleagues that came off the same course ended up what I call in software farms, where you're handed like a piece of paper and go code that, or they were selling hardware and, they didn't seem to really enjoy it. It was kind of very monolithic in terms of what they were doing. But for me, I got to sit with the people that had the actual business problems. And I think what was very enriching for me was I started to learn almost as much about business as I did about technology. And I had to keep those technology chops really sharp because technology changes all the time. But what I really, really enjoyed was problem solving and sitting, listening to business problems. And I think what was described to me at the time, and this was me in my sort of early to mid 20s, starting out in my career, that I was able to equally talk technology and business, which I didn't think was a rare thing, but apparently it was a rare thing. Techies like to build things. Business people maybe don't understand what tech's capable of doing. But I was somehow found myself in a lane that really served me well because that allowed my career to really grow. I was seen as a business person, but also a technology person. And so I really, I suppose, progressed all the way up into 2000 to be the leader of the organization from a technology perspective when Prudential decided to set up their subsidiary in Ireland. And so I became one of the first 7 leaders to go in to start up that company, which is great because startups are very, very different, as you know.
Yes. Wow. So, what's so interesting about that story? There is one major theme, and you said it yourself, is you always trusted your senses, and you took a lot of paths that maybe others didn't either appreciate, understand, or agree with, which really leads me to my next question. So you had a thriving career, top of your game at a gigantic organization, a global organization, and you started to ask yourself bigger questions. And you consciously made a decision to leave. So tell us about the things around that experience that prompted you to shift gears to say, I'm going to leave my executive life and begin again.
Yeah, and just before I go to the leave, I must tell about a very important chapter. So, starting up the subsidiary for Prudential in Ireland was an amazing learning and growth. But what really, I think, accelerated my career and brought me into entirely new experiences is when the head of the US businesses asked me to come to the United States in 2016. Actually, his words were, "This is great on the subsidiary side. It would be wonderful to see this recreated inside the mothership." And so and that was a decision point too, back to sort of the risk, sort of, what do I want to do? I don't have all the information. Will I do it? To move to the United States in my late 40s. and take up a role that I hadn't done before. And it was very much about upgrading the customer experience and running customer service and things that a technologist and somebody who ran a subsidiary hadn't necessarily done. But it's back to trusting the fact that I have the skills that can be applied in different ways into different bodies of work, and really working towards building those relationships and understanding of the organization and what needs to be done, and then rallying a team behind that. So that was a glorious 7 years that I really want to make sure I honor, because it was from that vantage point that I did the very thing that you've just said. I decided that now is the time to leave that. And I had progressed to a degree that was just a wonderful organization that was built within the organization. Working with people I absolutely adored, for an organization that I had learned so much from and was very grateful to then hang on a minute. Why is this not enough? And it depends on your definition of enough. It certainly was enough in terms of somebody who came from little sleepy Donegal to working in a Fortune 50 company for an extraordinary company that was going to afford me the opportunity to lead very significant things, to saying, I want to go back home. And that actually came with a lot of deep reflection, introspection, and many circles of back and forth that I'm sure many people that listen to your podcast are often met with along the way as well.
Yeah.
So happy to talk about sort of some of the genesis of that.
Well, what I'd love to do is peel that back a bit. So my logical linear brain would go to, okay, I'm starting to feel a connection to going back home. You said I want to go back home. So my brain goes to, was there a pro and con list? Like, did you actually sit down with pen and paper, or did you just start getting into dialogue with different people? Like, how did you start to really crystallize, I need to make a decision here?
You know, it's interesting you should mention a pro and con list, because going to America in 2016, I did a pro and con list. When I left America, I did no pro and con list. And you actually made me reflect there as to sort of why was it so different coming over to America and doing the pro and con versus coming back. And the only thing I can think, Jeannie, is when I was leaving to go to America, I know Ireland. I've been brought up in Ireland. I understand it culturally and everything else, how to live here. I didn't understand that about America, despite the fact I used to visit 6-7 times a year as part of my job. But visiting and then living with somebody is a completely different thing.
Yes.
So the pro and con list, it's interesting going to America, the pro and con list, and I'm sort of data-driven person. I put down all these categories about what I could learn, what I could do, what could I contribute, friends and family, and pro and cons. And I give them all a little percentage weighting point. And the sad thing was they both came out with the same number. So I don't know if that was my brain playing with that or not. But eventually I had to sort of sit with it in myself and in my heart to really feel, is this the right thing for me to do at this time? And in sitting with it, the main thing that really arose was, you know what, Caroline? You will actually feel this eventually. You would rather live with disappointment over regret. And what I mean by that is, I'd rather be disappointed that I took a leap into something that didn't work out and I can roll it back, versus the regret of saying, I had this amazing opportunity that really isn't afforded to everybody, and I didn't have the courage to try it. So that was that sort of coming into America, pro and con. When I was coming out, and remember, I do know Ireland, I knew what I was coming back to, all of those things. One of the biggest prevailing things for me that was really what was starting to gnaw a little was the missing of friends and family. It really was. That was the biggest thing, because as much as I could visit home and they could visit me and I was here for the holidays and this and that, we all know that life is lived in between those moments. It's the organic stuff. It's we're meeting for coffee and this other thing came up and now that's going to spark this and so forth. And those things were really absent. Everything felt rushed and packaged because that's how you had to live your life when you lived so far away from where your family and friends are. And I suppose, like everybody else, the pandemic sharpened that sense of everything is not certain and nothing's a given. And, you know, spending time with friends and family is critically important. And meanwhile, I was working on very important stuff at work. We were going through a massive transformation. We were very energized about the difference we could make. So these things were bumping up against each other, which was causing anxiety for me in terms of like, what is my next step? And that's when I started to sit with it. And as I always say, sometimes these things start as a whisper and eventually they get to be a shout.
Yes. So the whisper that became a shout, that became the decision, you consciously made the choice. Talk to us about some of the fears and challenges that surfaced once you made that decision.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I actually seen an interesting TED talk by a guy called Tim Ferriss, and it was related to fear setting. You know, we all talk about goal setting and everything else, and it's a really useful kind of tool that he has come up with. That when you're in that fear mode and you're trying to overcome a challenge, it sort of has a number of pages. The first page has this like, "What if I," and then ... fill in the blanks, right? So, what if I left my job and went back to Ireland and had nothing else to do, right? Just that could have been mine, you know. So I played with that. And then there's 3 columns underneath that. You define what is the thing that you're trying to do. So what is the worst thing that can happen? Then what you try to do is in the next column, come up with prevent. Well, then what could I do to prevent some of these things? Now you could have a list of like all these things could happen. These are all the things I could put in to buffer and prevent. And if all else fails, the third column is repair. So what that does is it allows you to actually think out loud and put the pen to paper to say, actually, when I see this in its fully kind of thought out sense, it's not niggling and worrying me so much because this can be overcome. And then you get into sort of the next page, which is what are the benefits of doing this thing? As in going back and leaving and whatever, and re-engaging back in Ireland for me. And then I think the third page was to do with, well, what are the risks if I don't?
Yes.
So I think what's helpful to that, and I would encourage people who are to be interested in that to look at the TED Talk, is, you know what, we look at fear and then we don't blow it out in the same way as we blow out a goal. And oftentimes we do have to do that to sort of feel the substance of it. And is there real weight there or not? And that really helped me kind of, because again, left brain, right brain, I have to sort of go down that route. And I got to do, it wasn't a spreadsheet this time. But then, of course, you have to test your thinking. And this was my journey anyway. Obviously, my family were very much involved in that. And I had a life coach and a spiritual coach who were really helping me to allow fear to sort of drop away and to really feel the impact of my own intuition and to allow myself to be guided by that and to trust that, actually. And so if you think about the mechanisms, so, you know, people will do research on these things, and then your trusted counsel. I adore the people that I work with, but I didn't speak it out loud at work. And here's why. First of all, I think it can be a little dangerous to speak it out loud at work when you haven't fully thought it through, because what happens then is you may be viewed as not being committed to the journey ahead. And I still was. I actually get my fuel out of continually rolling my sleeves up. I never took the foot off the gas for 1 second, right up until the very end, because I love the job. I love the company and the people. But speaking it out loud, actually, I have this thing in my head that you start to become the lame duck president for the period of time that you've spoken out loud until you actually leave. So I was very careful that, first of all, it was a very definite choice that was well thought through from my vantage point and family before I actually spoke it out loud at work.
You just said so much there that I want to just highlight. Like if I had a highlighter, I would be highlighting some of the things you said. You said something that was so important that I want to make sure gets heard and felt by anybody listening or watching this. And that is around what happens if I don't do this? Because I think that right there is something that is absolutely crucial when you're making any big life change, is what happens if I don't. Very often what I see is compromise to health, mental state, just family units. It's just social ability, our success in life, our presence in life, because we're ignoring information that's coming to us for a reason. So I wanted to just acknowledge that. And then what you just shared is also really important, is you talk to your trusted circle of advisors in your life to almost like hear yourself say it, make your body feel what you're saying before you then could go into your thinking mind world, your professional self, to socialize it there. And I'm curious, in your trusted circle, did you get any advice or counsel or reaction that made you think differently than the path that you were on? Or did you get reinforcement and accolades and, yeah, you got to do this? Just curious to know a little bit more about that.
I would say mostly weighted on the trusting my own intuition and timing. There were some people who sort of thought, that's curious because you have risen to a very senior position. The work is still really important and you like it. This is the stage of your career when you're really starting to become successful financially. How could you, that seems like an odd thing. So I did have that peppered in. But for the most part, the council were in Ireland. So it was a natural kind of magnetic pull that they wanted me to come back. So that was maybe somewhat diluted. So I did pick up sort of both scenarios, but not enough to be able to ignore my own ultimate instincts. I think it's important to get the information that you want to take on board, but not crowdsource the solution so that it ain't yours anymore.
Don't crowdsource the solution. Oh my goodness. Because now, so take us into the moment, or the moments, when you decided, okay, I'm going to share this decision with my professional colleagues, peers, who I'm reporting to. So give us a sense what that was like.
It was nerve-wracking in so much as the night before I had a one-to-one with my boss, who, again, wonderful, wonderful leader. I wasn't nervous of her per se, but it's just now I'm speaking it out loud for the first time at work. And I did go, she was the very first person I told about my decision, and I talked to her about it, and she was extremely understanding. The way she said it back to me, she says, if you'd led with anything other than it's family and I need to get back, she says, I would have tried to convince you otherwise. But she understood. I had spent 7 years working for the company in the States, 16 before that in Ireland. She was extremely understanding about my reasons. And then very supportive of how that sort of last 8 weeks before I actually physically left. Then it was sort of harder to go and tell my team, to be honest with you. But the tough thing about that is oftentimes there's a whole change management routine, so you can't tell people straight away. So you're living with the knowledge of it and knowing that things that we're talking about doing in November, December, I ain't going to be there. So you do feel a bit strange in that moment, and you do want to, but you have to honor the particulars of, there's ducks in a row that have to be sorted out as people start to ingest this news and figure out next steps. So there was a little day or two where that was kind of hard, or maybe a week. And then I was able to bring it out into the open and be able to talk about it more freely.
And so now let's transition to, you're back home. I'd even love to hear, what were the first 4 to 6 weeks like when you left at the end of the summer? You're back in Ireland. What was that like? Was that a tough transition for you?
It was very rainy. I'll start with that. It was like the worst summer for rain. But so we would do a remark on that, oh, we're leaving behind the good American weather. All right, seasons. All right, that's the first thing. But just, it really was about getting back into our home and being able to sort of reassimilate. And it's interesting because, I say I know Ireland, you had to get back in with doctors and dentists and just general admin-y stuff. connecting with family, that was huge. We spent a lot of time going around and seeing family. We did a whole road trip to Scotland and the UK, and we have been building a house very slowly over the course of a couple of years that now was starting to accelerate. So now that we're physically back, we were able to be more hands-on and really get involved in that. And we all know what that takes, running around, getting this and that and the other, and evaluating, you know, what you're going to put here and there. So that was time consuming, but also a nice, interesting project to be able to sort of figure out. And then for my own continued spiritual wellness, I ended up going on a retreat, which I call a palate cleanser between corporate America and where the reinvention of life was going to happen, you know?
The palate cleanser. I love that. Well, when you were on the retreat, did you get any, I like to call them downloads or whispers from the universe? Did you hear any information that reinforced the decision that you made and then started to open up new paths for you?
Well, I went with a very open mind to sort of really look at it as a palate cleanser and a downtime, as opposed to I'm searching, I'm grasping. I was pretty, you know, grounded in where I was going. I also realized that I could only see a mile down that 10-mile road, but I also trusted that the rest of the road would unfold. So at least with that mindset, I wasn't in there sort of scared and seeking solutions within a retreat setting. But what it did reinforce to me is really about that constant reinforcement of, you know, your own inner intuition and being guided by that, and not allowing the constant noise outside to continually to dilute that, and just always going back to those fundamentals of just self-knowledge, and really relying on yourself and taking accountability. And I'm generally fairly positively disposed. So even though it can feel like a shaky, scary time, because you're moving from something very known that you worked, for me, 35 years of my life, to, oh, here we are. And I didn't have this part paved yet, and I hadn't fully thought it through. And then I just gave myself permission. I says, do you know what? You're kind of allowed to take some time out between that and whatever this is going to be, to actually get to that spot with true authenticity, rather than I'm going to grab onto this and I'll grab onto that, knowing that that isn't even the right thing for me. I certainly didn't want to come back to Ireland and get into another corporate role, but I did want to continue to use my brain, my skills, my talent for business and for people. And so I knew all of that part of it. And then it was like, okay, then how do you create that? So that sitting in those retreat type of sessions allows that to sort of percolate over you and start to sort of seep into you a little bit more, because you have this interesting, Jeannie, no internet for 4 days. I've never experienced that before. You know, no emails, no pings, no nothing. And so you have to be alone with your thoughts and your journal. And it was a really, really good time for me to do that, because it solidified it for me.
Yeah. So you lived in a world that had high demand, high pressure, so much activity, so much demands on your mental, spiritual, emotional self, to then being just in your own world that you create. And I almost feel like there was a foundational and a structural strength building that was happening there. Yeah. So you made a choice. You cut a tie to something that was very much your identity, so that you then could go inwardly to figure out, what is it I really want? What is it I now want to bring into the world, which is really my next question. So here we are, wrapping up 2023. You made a really important choice for yourself, for your life. What are you up to now?
So after all of that sort of happened, you know, we get into September and I'm starting to think, okay, I met some people. I always think, you know, the universe provides, you know, you can be guided by that, by your instincts, and to be drawn through into something. So on this retreat, I met multiple people, which led to me doing a keynote, which led to me meeting 2 people who wanted business consultancy, which led to me doing a number of other very exciting and interesting things. So I always think that, you show up and just stuff by, great magic, we can call it, starts to happen for you. I reconnected with so many people, and yourself included, Jeannie, that's led to this podcast. So never underestimate the small steps that lead to where your path is bringing you to. And I have full confidence and belief in that. And so where I'm at right now, I am a business consultant to actually businesses and individually. That's what I'm doing. But more importantly, what am I creating? And I think that is where a lot of my passion lies now. And what I'm creating is really a very, what I call interesting crossover between being a business executive and also being able to understand people and help people at a more soul level. And so when I start to think about, what we honor in the workplace, when I went, all through my career, I realized throughout my career, I was contributing, but I was receiving. So it was a two-way street, contributing and constantly receiving through learning. And in the latter part of my career, I was drawn to deep observation of people, how they showed up to work, what they leaned on, maybe what they over-indexed on, who was successful, who was trying so hard, but they weren't successful. And then what was it that set them apart? So I started to really play with that and do some research on it and start to really sit with it myself to say, like, you have 35 years on the field. What did you observe? And the major thing that I kind of started to key into was there's a lot of people with wonderful IQ. We know them. They're very smart and they figure out solutions and they're great, but maybe not so hot on the EQ side of it. And then you have other people who are brilliant at the EQ and maybe not deep on the IQ, but you watch them and say, who's showing up, who's making the best products and services, who's leading people in a better way. But then you also go deeper and say, but are they happy? Are they peaceful? Are they content? Are they doing this through hustle and striving? Or are they really doing this through flow? And I started to realize that there was a missing quotient, which I like to refer to as SQ, or soul quotient. And I think about what's underneath the soul quotient. And then that's the rounded out 3-legged stool with your IQ, your EQ, and your SQ. And so now I'm fascinated to really unpack how SQ starts to make people more successful at work. And that's the body of work I'm working on right now.
Brilliant, brilliant. If I were sitting in the room with you right now, I'd be giving you the biggest high five, because this to me is so crucial for the future of work, the future of the workplace, the future of businesses, the future of corporations, because we are no longer just our thinking minds, which EQ I put into that category.
Yeah.
We just cannot continue to keep that soulful self out of the narrative. I'm so thrilled that you're talking about it in the way that you're talking about it. And so now, what is it you want to do with Soul Quotient?
Well, what I want to do is we're actually starting to arrange a number of retreats, like business retreats with a difference, if you like. I think people, having dipped in and out of the wellness retreats and those kinds of things, I've seen that there's really a gap. What happens sometimes in these wellness retreats is, you'll be in the tools during those few days, meditation and various different other things. But it's never really related to your work life and the kinds of things that you're tackling, or your family life and your home life. It's like, here's the thing, we're going to do it in the moment, and you feel great. And you walk away, and then you've got to go back to your real life. What I found was missing is, first of all, because there's thousands and thousands of years of deep philosophy and wisdom in these, this is not a woo-woo thing. And I think that's why people are almost nervous to sort of really try to bring it to the fore, because it seems like it's all incense burning and
that it's not efficient, and that it's not related to what they're doing on a daily work basis. And it's 100% related.
100% related, because if you're white knuckling your way through it and you've got the outward semblance of success, but deep down you can't get out of the bed for most of the weekend, or you're self-sabotaging in any way because you got to get back on, you got to get the scaffolding back on to get back on the field on Monday, and then you white knuckle your way through it. What you realize is I can look outwardly successful, I can show up good in the workplace, but I am not fulfilled in my life because everything feels forced. Everything doesn't feel like, it's genuinely coming. I'm, again, crowdsourcing from what others would like me or validate my idea at work. And if they don't, then I'm going to be like really thrown off a loop and off balance. And then I'm not going to show up good for the people I lead. And it's all this internal stuff that people innately have and sometimes cannot access because it's being crowded out by everything else that's going on in their lives. And it is the channel and the vehicle that will lead them to genuine feelings of their own self-worth, which will show up in everything that they do at work. And, there's a lot of stuff about bring your authentic self, but not really actually tapping into what does that actually mean? Yes. What does that mean at its most fundamental? And I mean, thousands and thousands of years worth of wisdom in this space, but rarely brought into the workplace, rarely brought into the healing parts of retreats because it's never explained. I mean, who's ever been for a sound bath and thought that was amazing, but don't really know what's actually happening with the binaural sounds into their physical system and where stress lies and what that does to them. So you have to, I think business people, at least in my experience, like to understand the what.
Yes.
And then it's like, I got it. So then when I do that thing, this helps me in that way. And then you're more likely to install the things that work for you as part of your normal practices in life. And so this retreat is really bringing together a fusion of that, my experience in business, but also my passion for this subject, as well as a very sought after spiritual healer who's actually going to be in situ, actually doing this work as well. And so we are just unpacking something that's really unique, very much for the professional who's feeling that I'm successful, but I don't feel that good anymore.
Yeah, or I feel empty. The other thing that I was thinking about is what scares people for this type of work is they've created a whole scaffolding around how they show up at work. And there's probably a fear that, oh my gosh, if I go too deep, I'm going to unravel. I'm going to open up Pandora's box, and then I won't be able to put this back together because I'm the primary income earner. I'm the only, income earner, or this is the world that I've created. And I love how you just described it, because what I also know and feel really strongly that I know you're doing this is creating a safe, constructive space that people will identify with. And you do whatever work you're called to do in this space. It's not one size fits all. And I think what you're really doing is also going to attract people that are sitting with some questions, that maybe there's some sort of stirring that they want to explore with other people who think like them, who live like them.
Yeah.
And I also love this idea of the healing, the clarity, the ease and flow that will come into your life once you've done this level of investigation. So I just wanted to echo that back, because I think the timing of it is magnificent. It's just so important. And I love the term soul quotient. Like I said to you, I'm like, gosh, I wish I thought of that. That is so good. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about me. You touched on it a little bit with some of your responses, but talk to us a little bit about your spiritual practice and how do you bring that into your daily life?
So I've always been fascinated with the facet of spirituality, if you like. And I probably, I grew up in a religious background, but that wasn't it. That was more the doctrine, the sort of the things that sort of we do through our religious practices. But it wasn't truly a deeper understanding of falling from head to heart and really understanding what that's all about. That came much later. I probably got introduced to it through a book that I was given in 2006 called Ask and It Shall Be Given, which still sounds quite religious, but it really is more about just understanding of that wisdom that actually continues to live within inside us, and our ability to access it and then leverage it to have peaceful and successful lives. Now, I have to say that didn't lock in immediately. I continue to, I call it spiritual shopping. So there was a lot of spiritual shopping going on. I'll try this, I'll try that. I'm kind of believing it, but I'm not feeling it. I could intellectualize it a lot. So if we're having a conversation, I could talk, I hold my own in any conversation about it. But again, I wasn't dropped into it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really until, I think, again, the pandemic seems to be responsible for a lot of these kinds of massive transformations in people, that it actually, the key unlocked for me. And that was through doing work with a spiritual advisor that I had back in Ireland. And, I think the biggest unlock for me is just sitting with somebody like that. It isn't like therapy or anything. You're just sitting with somebody like that and you are having conversations. And she has got immense wisdom when it comes to this kind of stuff. She just channels it. Mm. And the biggest unlock for me was the word accountability. And I've always felt I was a really, really accountable person, except I was describing something that happened in my life that was fairly significant. And I says, and I wished that hadn't happened because that lost me this amount of time, or, I was, and she goes, stop. You realize that you were in that. You were a decision maker. Mm. That's not to blame, and that's not to blame, and that's not to blame. And even you're not to blame. That was on your life path. That was part of your learning. And she really pulled me out of any desire to be a victim. And I find that victimhood is the most debilitating sense or place to be, that really stops you in your tracks. And I never identified myself in that way, but I realized, that seeps in every now and again, where it's easier to point outside and say that, and that. And it suddenly was that big thing for me. And everybody will find their own thing that's the aha moment, that, I'm accountable for everything to do with my life. There is nowhere I can point to say, if only that, then I would have been that. That's ridiculous. I am the creator and co-creator of my life. Mm-hmm. And therefore, every choice that I made along the way is my decision. Therefore, I can have no victimhood, and I am accountable for my life and where I've been bringing it and where I brought it. And it was the biggest freedom moment for me, because from there on, everything past that was underpinned with that very philosophy. That was very empowering, actually.
God, that was so good. Like, just want to sit with that for a second. I am the creator and co-creator of my life, and just to sink into that. And I think what's so important about what you just said is we live lives that are so externally referenced. We keep looking outside of ourselves for the validation, the accolades, the blessing, whatever the word is, to then say to our inside self, yes, you're valuable, you're worthy, you know how to do this. And what you just said is that's the power of the inside work. And how that spirituality is just fanning the fire of that inside work. Which leads me to my last question, because I'd love for you to just mentally take a step back and zoom out 5 years from now. Where are you? What are you doing? What the heck happened?
Well, I love that you actually said the words, it's an inside job, because I know that to be absolutely true now. And I wished that I had all of these tools the whole way through my career, because
Me
you know
too.
what? It would have made life so much easier. I would have been happier. I'd have enjoyed it all a lot more. People always say it's the journey and not the destination. And of course it is. But the journey feels hard. Yes. And then you think, retirement is the destination. And I'm kind of in that I call myself semi-retired because I want to continue to do stuff. But, that's not the destination, ain't that either. I mean, it's the journey, the continued journey, and it is an inside job. And really what I want to do is be a creator, being able to help people to really understand and avail of what I've been able to understand and avail of. And I found that, as I re-examined it, because I've always been a logical person, I've always been a big reader, I've always been a study of things, that I found it hard to get to this place because there's too much stuff. It's like the diet industry, Jeannie. You want to do the fasting diet, or you want to do the cabbage soup diet, or you want to do the low calorie, or you want to do the keto, and then you're like, all right, well, which one will I do? I'll read about all of them, I'll try all of them, and then you give each of them a week, and you're suddenly not skinny, and you're like, okay, none of that works. It's the same for a lot of this gorgeous wisdom information. Well, I had a massage and I did a bit of meditation and it felt good for a day, but then something happened at work and then I'm like thrown off and it's all about the inside job, because all of that won't fix it. Nice things, but it won't fix it until you truly drop into understanding. Key thing is having your own self-worth, but truly believe in it authentically, not just like I've got a lot of. We've seen people who look like they've got a lot of self-worth. They're immaculate. They're like central casting. They're gorgeous, but they're not, they don't have it in there. They have not dropped into that true, that's a mask. So letting people really drop that mask, moving in an era from work that is kind of re-identifying itself. And you mentioned at the top of the call, future of work, where the soul quotient will be honored at the table in the same way. And that's not to say people have to espouse all of the things that really make them feel their self-worth or whatever, but you're just in that moment. You're in a meeting and something pushes your trigger like it often does. And you have that traffic light system, which is 2 breaths. Breath 1, red light, triggered. I'm starting to feel unworthy. I haven't been heard. I haven't been listened to. Red light. Take the second breath. You get to the orange light. Okay. What did that show up for me in this second? And you realize that some of it is old wiring and old stuff from childhood or old something else, old tapes that aren't actually true anymore, but you've done the work. You realize they're not true anymore. So you drop into the green light. Now you don't have to be in a reactive mode in that situation at work that only then starts to create further challenges down the road. Because if you show up all the time in that mode, constantly seeking to be seen and validated and whatever, you don't need that anymore. It falls away. And it just makes your career journey and your life journey so much easier.
Wow. So soul quotient at the table with competency discussions. That's the future. That's the world that I'm thrilled to be a part of with you. I didn't realize through this conversation how much of the same language we use. It is so nice to be in conversation with somebody who's really doing the work and is looking forward to putting more and more of this type of conversation in front of business people. And Caroline, I am so grateful for you to share your heart and your story and all of your incredible wisdom. And I'm thrilled to see what 2024 is going to look like for you.
Well, thank you, Jeannie, for being such a supporter of other women. The way you show up for people is incredible. You've already got the soul quotient. I'm surprised that you didn't come up with it, because you inhabit it. You inhabit it all the time, and you support people in such unique ways. You're on this path where we both know this isn't just a plug and play. This is going to be hard to sort of get those gears going. People need it. People need it so much now. And I'm so happy to be on this path with you too.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.